All right, there we go. Welcome everybody to Dessert in a Movie. My name is Kathleen Morgan and I am with the library and delighted to see you here for yet another exciting session of this retirement boot camp program. First off, we want to thank our sponsor, Capital Federal, who has provided funding for this whole series. And so if you're one of their customers, please thank them because they make this possible. And because they've been really, really wonderful to us this year and also for next year as well. They've committed to 2 years for the program. So just a quick housekeeping review. If you think of a question in the course of the conversation, there's a chat bubble on the bottom of your screen. Just click on that and you can type your question in. We're a small enough group tonight though too. If you want to make a comment, you can just raise your hand and we'll call on you. You guys are all such pros. There's really, I really don't even need to go through this, but just a little bits of reminders. So with that, I will turn it all over to Reece Winter, who is one of our info services librarians at the library and who's helping with this series. So Reece, I will let you take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Kathleen. And hello, everyone. I'm happy to be back. And we are very fortunate this evening to have Saralyn Reece Hardy with us, the Marilyn Stokestad Director of the Spencer Museum of Art. Sorry, Stockstad, my mistake. Stockstad Director of the Spencer Museum of Art, and Kelly Banks, who is the Executive Associate in the Director's Office at the Spencer Museum of Art. So thank you both so much for being with us today. We're excited to hear what you have to say. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Saralyn.
Okay, I am so thrilled to be here, to be asked to talk about some things that Kelly and I have actually been working a lot on together. And our brains have fused in this way recently because I have been teaching an art on campus class for the last several years. And one of my areas of interest is public art. So you invited me to talk about something that's of great interest to me. And then, although I have been at Mass MoCA many times, several times, I had never seen the movie. So the movie was quite revelatory. And before we get into what I have prepared for you, what I'd like you to do is take a moment and think, and we're going to report out later, but think for now, a time when you encountered art in the context of whatever you would call community. I'm not making a definition here. Whatever you would call community, that moment of encounter that seemed to reveal to you something unexpected. You know, it doesn't have to be, this does not have to be profound. This is just like trying to reach back into yourselves and come up with that moment that made the art and the person and the community, like there was just a little spark that went off. And so please try not to think about this during the whole presentation, but I did want to warn you that I'd like to have a dialogue about that as it relates to the film. Because in a sense, I think that the film is really not about Mass MoCA. It's really about what it is, what the relationship between art and community is. And, you know, some of it has been redefined for you in the movie about art and economic development, art and this, art and that. But I think we need to open our minds and give art its rightful place to be at home in many guises and therefore elusive and also persistent. So I'll open with that. And we've prepared a few pictures that I think maybe would lead in to to us talking about this more carefully. Some of you know that I began my career in the arts at the Spencer Museum many years ago. And I was a research assistant working in the museum that Charlie Eldridge was running. But I was working for a wild and crazy and wonderful education director by the name of Dolo Brooking. And she was a very important mentor to me that jostled all kinds of ideas in my mind. So, but I left after the grant funding dried up, and I moved to Salina, Kansas, and I thought my life in the arts was over. Strangely, my life in the arts had just begun. And it was forging this relationship between art and community. So I think let's take a dive into it, Kelly, if you're ready, because I want to share some of that with you. Because you know the Spencer Museum, and I'll talk a little more about that, but I want to share a little bit about my life there.
It'll be just a second. Teresa's working on getting me
Yeah.
screen access.
Okay, and just for a little more detail about that, because of who's on this call, Sharon Katzman is on this call, and Sharon's life and my life have sort of intertwined over the years and to be continued. But one of the reasons I am back in Lawrence is because of David Katzman. And David was a very strong supporter of mine when I was a very non-traditional student coming back to school at KU. So I owe David a lot of things. How are we doing, Kelly? Are we almost there?
I'm consulting Kathleen because I'm not familiar with the screen sharing.
I
So.
think you need to go, into settings.
Okay.
I mean, I can just talk without the pictures, but we have all of these great pictures for you.
Or you could email it to Reece, and then you could share it. How's
Yeah.
that? Would that work?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
We should have done this in the pre.
Yeah, we were
Oh,
too
well.
chatty. I know, we got talking too much.
Oh, well. But so in the movie, so much is being talked about how Mass MoCA and the history of the building and the various aspects of that. And I want to propose an idea that is really, it's not so much about, is it a museum or is it public art, or how much is the artist and how much is the curator. But I think the most exciting things are when one looks at a community and a campus like KU as a whole thing. Not what belongs inside a museum, but actually what belongs outside. So I moved to Salina. My first job, I'm driving with a little crying baby in my car. It's an old station wagon, and I think I've completely left my my professional life at home, which was here, and come to find out it was a great place for me. And what made it great was the attitude of the community about being embracing of new ideas. Okay, right on cue. Thank you.
Excellent.
This looks like Kelly's screen of stuff she's working on. So maybe while we're getting ready for these pictures, can anybody oh, okay, here we go. Okay, dessert in a movie. Let's go to the next one.
All right.
The next slide. Nope, go back one, please. Okay, so this was back in Salina. This is the first big downtown mural, and they engaged Sashio Yamashita. And that was just at the time that I moved to Salina. And this building was on the side of a bank that is no longer there, but it was primarily an abstract painting on the side of a building. Next slide, please. We'll drive throughs. I wanted to show this because even Kelly couldn't recognize that I'm the female in the center, and I'm working with an artist in residence who's working outside in Salina, and he's building a giant zoetrope. Do you know what I'm talking about here? So a zoetrope is sort of a cartoon thing. You know, you can have those, you spin them and they look like they're animated. He's an animator, and we asked him to do a big outdoor project. And he said, let's do a buffalo crossing. So if you drove by, you could see the buffalo running. So there were signs that, and there I am. And here's the thing. This is when I learned you're always getting your hands dirty.
Yeah.
You know, it is not, you saw this in the Mass Mocha film, that the people who are helping the artist are always on the ground trying to buy into the artist's vision. And I learned this years ago, that this is really part of the fun. In fact, it's the most fun. That there you are trying to figure out how you're going to attach this big vinyl thing with a bunch of buffaloes. And this was all created for one of the parks in Salina. So it was a drive-by. Next slide, please. And there it is. And, you know, it's in the snow, and it was incredibly beautiful. Sadly, we lost John Brister. He is no longer living, but this memory is living. And he also has a number of animated films that I'd really love to preserve. But next slide, please. And then another important project, in my own understanding, was a public art project that we did with Parks and Rec. And this was engaging an artist who would select a place in the outdoor landscape to create something. Well, it turns out it wasn't a sculpture. It was an overlook. So he redesigned a place that you could look at the landscape. And wandering around with Alan Stovall, who was a landscape architect, completely opened my eyes to what public art should and could be. If I think there is something missing in Lawrence, it's the marriage of the landscapes and the art. We need more cohesiveness. We need more understanding of how the horizon lines and the overlooks and the green areas and how all these things interact. But this was a very profound project for me. Alan was a regional designer from Athens, Georgia, and he completely shifted the way I thought about art, taking it completely out of these interior spaces. Next slide. You don't see the right, you don't see all of the pictures here, but you know, public art isn't only just outside, and community art is not outside. So this was a community poem. And this community poem solicited poems and ideas and narratives from people all across the community. And the outlet then was the Salina Journal. So after a period of about a month or so, all these submissions to the Salina Journal were put together by 3 editing poets who were Kansans and Nebraskans. And there became a community poem made from all of these poems, these bits of writing that had come in from, like it would be the old-fashioned way of crowdsourcing. And so crowdsourcing, and then we showed, I can't even believe we did this, we showed the community poem in the windows of the old post office on 13 slide projectors that were supposed to go off at different times. This was before you had digital. These were all slide projectors that we had on timers. And those would show up at twilight. Next slide. So This is a fantastic public art piece that was actually done from the Salina Arts Center with a curator who was standing in for me while I was at the National Endowment for the Arts. But they are literally dancer acrobats going off the water tower. Now, there's a lot of risk taking in the arts, but I can't think of anything that's more direct than this. And you know, I ask you to think about what the things were that caused you to think again, like that art and community encounter. And I would submit that it's making the familiar slightly unfamiliar and the unfamiliar slightly familiar. So next slide, please. There they are. Aren't they incredible? So this is Lawrence, Kansas. And the museum did a big project on the Topeka painter, Aaron Douglas, who was a very important figure during the Harlem Renaissance. African-American artist who was very well known for his abstraction. Grew up in Topeka, Kansas. And as part of that big and important exhibition that we did, the first of its kind around Aaron Douglas at the Spencer Museum, we also did something downtown working with Dave Lowenstein. And we did this mural with the community, 2007. I do not know where that time went, but 2007. And we were all proud of it. And we were all like, here's the way it should work. You know, you work downtown, you work in the museum, you work. Well, guess what? The building sold. And the building sold to a lot of controversy about what would happen to the mural. Okay, next slide, please. Some of you will know that there were letters to the editor, there were letters to the developer, there was all of this going on, because you know, Lawrence loves this. Somehow we love to rabble rouse. And but I'm not that crazy about it. I don't know why I'm always in the rabble rouser situation, but I'm not that crazy about it. But we did a lot of face-to-face meetings with the developer. We tried to do as much as possible in these small circles of intimate sharing. And the developer ended up that bought the building and tore it down and made it into something else, paid for the new mural. So the new mural looks like this. This is the one that's down there now. And it has reference to the old one and also the tearing down of the old one. So we were able to include Dave Lowenstein's resistance and still have the mural. So it was sort of living in that space of resistance and public art. So I really think this is a wonderful example of how communities can rally together to think about art in a specific way. So next slide. Like I say, I don't know how I get into this, but I get into this all the time, doing things that are somewhat talked about. But this is a work called Intertraveler. And it was with an exhibition that we did on speculative visions of the future from an Asian point of view. And this is Intertraveler. She only has legs and she's sitting in the tree outside the museum. Well, we kind of got away with that. And that was interesting and related to what we were doing inside. But next slide, please. We also put her in the panorama. And my colleague, Chris Kristalka, who was a director at the time, said yes to this. And I'm sure there would be moments later that he wondered why he had. But we put this art piece in the middle of the panorama. And there again, this is a historic artifact, but it makes you see it new. And so Interstellar looked very at home there somehow, because not only is the panorama a fiction, it really is a fiction that was created as a diorama. It isn't biologically accurate, is historically accurate for what was presented at the Columbian Exposition, but it calls that question about fiction and fact. Next slide. So you saw in the film Sol LeWitt, and Sol LeWitt has a presence in Lawrence, Kansas. So we have our own mass MoCA right here. We have a Sol LeWitt, beautiful, important Sol LeWitt that's in the School of Business, that's in the Spencer Museum of Art's collections. And it belongs to the Spencer Museum, but it is not a thing. It is a set of instructions. And if you heard Laurie Anderson talking about Sol LeWitt and his music piece, and she said he relives, you know, when I hear the music, he's reliving. Sol LeWitt did instructions for his work. So after his death, his foundation is carrying out the instructions for these works. So the work itself exists in a little contract that you repaint each time. So all you have to do is go down outside the School of Business, Cap Federal, by the way, we'll tip our hats to them again, and look in the windows, and it's cited there because I had the great pleasure of working on that art committee in Cap Fed. So all of those works of art and this Sol LeWitt lives there. Next slide. And I also wanted to share this because many of you will remember that we had a flag controversy. And we had an image graphic of that appeared to be like a flag on a flagpole outside Spooner Hall on Jayhawk Boulevard. There was an outcry about it being a defaced flag. It was not a flag. It was an art piece, a graphic, but it was on a flagpole. And so people were concerned that it was a real flag being defaced. We came to another compromise. I'm going to say this is a lot like the pollinators mural, and we moved it inside after a lot of consultation with the chancellor and the rest of the university, but we did not take it off view. And that was the compromise. We left it on view. We had someone in there all the time talking about what the art piece was, what it was meant to do. We put some other things up. But I guess the point here is making art in community, especially not inside walls, is always going to generate discussion and dialogue. So next. And then quite recently, in fact, today, there was yet another article in the Lawrence Journal World about, I think this one was about the defacement, the one today, but we had the theft of one of the panels of this work that's been in front of the art museum. So we've continued to do this, but you know, you put things in the public. And I think that the greatest problem here is that we should not be afraid. We should not let fear get in the way of us putting things out for the public. So it's very important to maintain the boldness, you know, and have your calculated risks. But this, when they were reinstalled, when the panels were reinstalled, we had a rededication to the work to the works, and we gathered community around. And I think in a sense that's really in part what the film is about community and how Mass Mocha changed it. But I thought you might like to see a little bit of these pictures. You can take them down now, Kelly. Kelly, do you have something that I've missed that you want to offer and say?
I don't think so. I think you touched on a lot of really important works that we have here in Lawrence, and the value of community around public art. So I don't really have anything else to add.
So are we ready to talk about the movie? I thought maybe I'd share a few of those things because I've been at this a while. My first job in the arts was in 1977, and I have worked continually in the arts since that moment. So I've been so lucky. But maybe we could, would you proffer to share? Would anyone like to step up and quickly share? And I'll cut you off if I think you're going too long. But to share something about an encounter with art and community. Yes, please, Maureen.
I have kind of a negative and a positive. When I was in LA, one of my friends did a public art piece to be in one of the subway stations, but one of the ones above ground, because they had just opened up their metro system. And it was so heartening to see the whole neighborhood worried about it being tagged, and they were going to take care of it. And it was so positive. But I also grew up in Chicago, and I can very well remember when the Picasso was put in Chicago, and the controversy was insane, and the jokes were terrible. But in the end, it's like on every mug or everything you ever see about Chicago. So it was kind of a wonderful turnaround to see how it started out as something ridiculously, amazingly controversial to something that just became sort of ho-hum, we got a Picasso. So those are my two exposures.
I like that. I like that double flip because we saw that in the movie, didn't we?
Yeah.
They use the woman as the thread throughout the film. She was sort of the walking, talking narrative of the history of the place, I felt. But she also had that flip, like she was saying, well, my office, I don't really like it being a beer garden, but and so I think that you're onto something there, that what we might brand as not quite serious and not giving, and probably some artists would think that, they're not respecting my work. But I think what you're saying is very important for anyone who's putting their work out there.
Yeah.
Is that, out there is among us, and sometimes we're stupid, and sometimes we're nutty, and sometimes we're irreverent, and all of that. So thank you for sharing that. Who else?
Good.
Yeah, okay.
When I think of community art, I think of Stan Hurd and his crop art. I don't know that he's doing that anymore, but he did a lot of it. I guess it was more like, would have been the 90s, early 2000s. So I don't know if do you know anything about that, Saralyn?
I do, because I followed Stan's work, and he has my favorite of his works is the Medicine Wheel that is out at Haskell. And he has a very, very lovely piece there that taps into to walking. You walk the Medicine Wheel. But I think he's still active. He had a very prominent piece that he did for Absolute Vodka that that caused a lot of consternation and debate. But he has been, he's worked on the land, making mostly representational images, very different than the Alan Stovall model that I was showing you of looking at the landscape as its own thing. But Jack, did you have something you were sharing?
I was just gonna say, I think I'm correct where it is. He just finished a new piece of Maya Angelou. And I believe it's in Atlanta for the museum down there, the Museum of Civil Rights. But
Right.
I've just read about it, and of course, now I can't remember all the details, but he's still very, very active. He maybe a year ago finished his project in Brazil as well. So he's running around doing a lot of work.
Yeah, I think he's doing
did
some
that-
stuff in, oh, I think
You
he's doing
said there
some
was
stuff in
a-
China.
Okay, so
the-
hold on,
was the
hold on,
Maya-
hold on. Kay, go ahead.
Was the Maya Angelou crop art?
Probably.
I think
Yes.
so.
It was
Well,
a,
I think
I'm guessing it is. I'm gonna say something really strange now, which is I place that in the cameo tradition.
Hmm.
You know, the tradition of doing cameos that were visages. Because it isn't like the portraits of Michelle and Barack Obama. It's not like that. It's more like the visage. And probably there's some other antecedents. Sharon, were you getting ready to jump in?
It just one of his earliest ones was of a Native woman
Okay.
that was recent in that, but he's active. He's now working on something and he's working, excuse me, with rocks. So
Okay.
it's more environmental the way Saralyn was talking about. It's not exactly a vista, but he's dealing with rocks and views right now.
Interesting. Okay, who else?
He
Who
also,
else?
by the way, did the quilt on Over the Dam.
Oh,
That's
right.
still there.
Of course. Yes, thank you. Who else? Who else will offer? Yes, Bill.
So when you were talking about outdoor art, I was reminded of an artist who visited here, Rohini Dalbasher,
Yes.
that your museum kindly connected me with. She was a fascinating person, but she had explored eclipses, and she had an audio piece
Yes.
about eclipses. And we went out to the Lead Center and laid down on the lawn, looking at the night sky, listening to her audio piece about eclipses. And that is just one of my more memorable interactions with visiting artists here.
Phil, that's such a beautiful memory. And I think what you're relaying is the broad scope of what art and community can be. And also art you can't really buy or sell. You know, we're out there flat on our backs looking at the sky. And it's just something we're doing together. But it takes an artist to like frame that experience for us. Somehow we're not going to do that as a group generally. I mean, maybe a few of us. So I think there are two aspects of that experience that are super important. One is that was a source of her own inspiration. So she felt comfortable sharing it in that way. And also she was engaging a lot of experts like Phil in this other kind of experience that was a more poetic experience, not the scientific experience. So,
That's great.
okay. Scott, were you waving your arms or were you just stretching?
Well, I was actually scratching my head, but I did have something on a much lower level, but I don't know. For those of you who remember South,
Oops,
you hear me?
now I can.
Okay. South Junior High, the old building, the circular junior high ended up being a nightmare from an education standpoint, but it had a large, long circular inner wall that our students would over the years paint murals on. And as far as interaction with community, they became very directional, where students particularly students knew their way around, but people coming in would be told you go to this certain mural and that was your turnoff. And so the art was done by the students, but it became very much a part of their life. And so, again, there's no deep meaning there. It's just how the public interacting with art
Right.
can make it very utilitarian.
Right. And I really like that point, Scott, because I think that just because it's utilitarian doesn't mean it's not art. I mean, you know, sometimes these things that we think of as very useful. I'm told that one of the hallmarks of creativity is useful novelty. And that might not apply in every case, but I throw it out for that because I think, again, it's the reframing that is also useful. Who else? Yeah.
I think I don't know if this fits the definition, but I like the surprise of seeing the student installations in the park behind the museum over the years as they appear every year by different students. And I think that surprise is really lovely.
Thank you so much, because we've tried to take full advantage of that grove that's back there, and the students love it. So I appreciate hearing that. And I sometimes think the temporary nature of things adds to their quality and their importance. You've sort of, you know, you forget about the things that you see all the time. You
Yeah, it's
walk
the
by-
surprise of encountering them. I think that's part of the joy of it.
Yes, yes. Who else?
I'll share. This is a very personal one, I guess, but my family at a recent, I think it was a couple years ago at Christmas, my stepdad had a canvas and he wanted each family member, even the little, like, you know, the 3-year-olds, my nephew, he wanted everyone to add to it. And, you know, we're all a little shy about what was going to go on there. You know, we're not artists. It's not going to be good. But it was a really meaningful piece after it was done. And it was really cool to see what everyone contributed. And, you know, that's something that we can frame and look back on and connected with a really personal memory. And so, yeah. That one was very special.
I really appreciate hearing that, because I do think that participation and broad participation is one of those ingredients for really meaningful community arts involvement. And you sort of see it at a concert or something when everybody's on their feet and you can, but if you're actually creating something together and supporting one another, that's a form of community building. And, you know, I think what you're mentioning is a direction that we'll be seeing more and more artists take. Because the structure of the single creative genius is suspect right now. And I'm not saying that it should be or that it will always be, but right now, the world is interested in what we can do as ensembles and what we can manage to accomplish together as we think about a more ecological framework for making art, for being artists. So I think that we're kind of onto something with this contribution by many people.
Yeah, I guess I would add to that. I was on a Lawrence Children's Choir trip to Lucas. And
Oh,
if
yeah.
there's any town where everybody's an artist, you know, whether they think they are or not, that one is definitely it. And we were there at the time when I remember talking to this guy about they were planning the Bull Plaza because they didn't have any public bathrooms. That was their biggest issue. And he said, we all gathered at the public library and they literally hatched a plan to build the Bull Plaza, which is a giant toilet where the public restrooms are housed. And he was saying, you know, we've got the high school kids helping with the mosaics and, you know, they had blueprints and they were going to auction off the first flush and all this kind of stuff. It was great. But I just thought it was such a wonderful literal community lift to get this art piece that ended up being, you know, practical as well.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's right. And Lucas, Kathleen, you bring up such a good place to think about, because in Lucas, when you drive around, you feel like it's some kind of virus, like, oh, here's Densmore and he's done it. And then all of a sudden here's Inez and she's doing it.
Yes,
and
it's
there's,
awesome.
all over the place.
Yeah.
Anybody else have something they just want to offer about yes, please.
Well, I reached way back.
Good.
My family moved to Lawrence when I was 5 years old. And we lived out east on 15th Street, way out by Oak Hill Cemetery. So our backyard was across the street from the cemetery.
Okay.
So anytime we were outside at night or driving by, I always saw the eternal flame. There's an eternal flame in the cemetery. And so that intrigued me over the years. And just lately, last few years, where these solar lights have been becoming popular, people have been putting them on their headstones, their family headstones. So it kind of adds to the eternal flame. There's lights, adding to what was there many, many years ago. And then
I'm so happy to hear that.
Yeah. And then I just really recently, maybe a couple months ago, I read a story about a boy who's earning his Eagle Scout. He went in and cleaned the area around the eternal flame. And if you look down on it, it's a cross. And he white painted it so it stands out more. And I never knew that was a cross, in my child's mind. So that just added more over the years. I just keep adding to this eternal flame that I remember as a child.
That's beautiful. That's so beautiful that you have this thread of experiences that connect in a really interesting way to that place. That's gorgeous. Thank you. Anybody else? Oh, I see some.
Hi,
Debbie.
I just got my video on, but how
Yay.
many of you remember when everybody had umbrellas hanging in their trees upside down here in Lawrence? That was so cool. Was that before you were here, Sarah?
I think I had just arrived, or I was in and out a lot.
Yeah.
Because I saw those and I thought they were great.
And then one house had a house coat hanging out there, and I thought they're being extra creative.
No, but you bring something really important up, I think, because it's so ecumenical. Everybody can have an umbrella and everybody can hang one out there.
Well, it was actually a protest because they tried to, was that house over there on Rhode Island, downtown?
Yes, it
Kathleen?
was, Katie Walsh.
Still
her house.
quite an art piece over there, I think.
Katie Walsh, she lives right over here.
Yeah.
Oh,
She might
okay.
have been protesting my building.
I bet.
And that would have been fine. But she always has something really amazing going on in her yard. And if you're bored, you can walk through her yard. She's such an incredible human being. So yeah, I think that was KT Walsh. And it was a protest about gentrification and the taking over of, smaller domiciles. And yeah, so.
Well, I thought people in Lawrence were doing that in support of people putting art in their yard. I
Maybe.
thought that's what it was for.
Well, I guess it's open.
Yeah.
Maybe
There
both.
was a lot
Maybe
of
both.
controversy because people in North Lawrence, and particularly when it was a stronger Black community, and this links to folk art, it links to outsider art, and it links to public art. Dinsmore's Garden of Eden was a tremendous protest against bankers and railroad men. And in North Lawrence, which was its own separate town, but also kind of overlooked by the elite, there was always very idiosyncratic extravaganzas in people's yards. And to a lesser extent, that was true in East Lawrence. And it wasn't always appreciated. People would go and say, what a mess. But some of the most extraordinarily creative stuff was done in North Lawrence. There's much less now because gentrification has come there as well.
I like to drive by the shoemakers, the leather person
R&J,
over there
yeah.
Mhm.
and his, in North Lawrence.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a very interesting place.
That's the real deal. And plus, they can really fix your shoes.
Oh, yes, and,
They can really fix
Price.
your shoes.
and they have the best leather conditioner there.
Yeah,
So
but
I
he's
want
one
to
of the
swing
few
back.
now.
Go ahead.
It's just that he's one of the few.
Yeah.
now.
Mhm.
I want to swing back to the movie and the artfulness of the movie, because I don't want you to feel that you didn't get to discuss the movie itself. Is there anything, so lots of use of music, lots of use of art stars. I thought that was interesting. There was a validation that was going on using people we've all heard of, like James Turrell and Saul Lewitt and Nick Cave, and all of this to make us proud. And that's something I would like to bring up, because we all, you know, we love to hear people say, oh, look what Salina did, or look what Lawrence did, or look what, you know. So if I just want to raise that as a little bit of skepticism about the movie, is because it is a beautiful space. And I went to see Art Stars there. That's why I was there. I was reviewing grants. I was mostly at NEA. I went there 2 or 3 times during my stint as the director of museums and visual arts, and saw that big space and saw many things in it. But at this point in my life, I'm wondering why it is that we all need to be reconfirmed by the art stars. And
Great question.
and when our self-confidence is going to be enough.
Top two.
And
Because you try and get people into your museum, you need economic support. And if you don't have a few, you don't need to have a blockbuster, but the space, it's interesting that you say it's beautiful. Mocha is still a pretty ugly looking thing. It was a textile museum, and then I mean, there are still areas that are still pretty rude. And what makes it beautiful is when you see lots and lots of people just grooving on the work that's there. And sometimes you need to have, quote, famous people to draw the folks and the reputation that will then support your local artists and your less known. It is an economic reality that, you know, a museum needs to survive. And a university museum has its own, you know, issues of funding and all the rest, but certainly Mass Mocha does. It's constant.
no, you're right. Yes, Jack, go ahead.
I agree exactly with Sharon. I think there was a little salesmanship in the movie, but it's interesting, and I certainly am not, well, you know, voiced in art and whatever, but I've been to a couple museums and know about a third that are kind of the opposite. You talked about Lucas, and to me, the best experience there was the Grassroots Art Museum,
Yep.
which is art that untrained people are doing. And the reason I enjoyed that so much is I was fortunate enough previously to have been in Baltimore for the American Visionary Art Museum, which is the same thing on a much larger scale. And I've seen both of those. And by chance, we were driving by before it opened. Now in Sheboygan, Kohler is opening a second museum that's dedicated to exactly that same kind of art of the guy who paints mailboxes type. Let me, you know, as a bad
The
example,
saws.
but that one's going to be big enough that they can put entire collections in it. So there is this grassroots movement that Saralyn was talking about to make it more community and to get away from selling the fact that we have a Monet in this museum or a Van Gogh in this museum, and do that. And a great example here in Lawrence for me, we just by chance happened to be there this morning, is we were over at Van Gogh buying some of the kids' art, and it's terrific, you know, and it leads maybe some of those people to do more public art.
Jack,
And it's kind of the opposite side of the famous arts.
And Jack,
Jack,
I really
Jack, there's-
appreciate that. I've just gotten the word from Kathleen that we have 5 minutes to go. So I want to do a little something about what you're going to see tomorrow. And Kelly is going to put in the chat the interview that has some pictures. Also, you will see that we are using exactly, when you go tomorrow, you'll see that Sharon's comment is exactly the way the Spencer Museum has gone. And that is some really important artists that you just are so thrilled to see, and some people with some artists that you have not heard of. And so I think that pathway tomorrow, be aware of this conversation, because I'm not trying to say one over the other. I'm basically hoping that we can think of our approach, that what we're talking about is building a relationship between art and community. And sometimes the terms of the relationship are open source, and sometimes the terms of the relationship are historical archive, and sometimes the terms of the relationship are learning. But you're going to see some beautiful things. You're going to see also our attempt to be in conversation with nature, even though we're mitigating light throughout the museum. So we've got views and non-views, and also the themes that you will encounter are designed for you to have your own ideas, not to say, oh, I wonder why they put this with this, but to think, oh, I see a very sparkly wolf here. I wonder what that sparkly wolf means to me as I turn and see this other thing. Like be empowered, please, to take it personally. And also there are QR codes all around, so bring your cell phones. If you want the deeper dive, you can use your QR code. And also, if you bring a little notebook, bring a little pencil, not a pen. You can't have a pen in the galleries, but a little pencil, and scratch down the name of the artist or the name of the piece. And then you go home, you get on your screen and you do a deeper dive into search the collection, which you can get to just from home. We are very proud of this. Yes, go ahead.
Saralyn, there is such a connection in my mind between Nick Cave and all his tchotchkes and outsider art, because most of the visionary and outsider art that I've seen really relates to that kind of collection. That's all. I just wanted to
love it.
point that out.
And you'll see much more tomorrow. And just if you don't know, I don't think I said this about the airport to the whole group, did I? Okay. Nick Cave has the signature piece in the new Kansas City airport, where you're going in and there'll be a lot of these little dangling, glittery, cloud-like things. And so that's one of many of the new art pieces. So you've had Terrell. I hope you came to the museum to see that when we did it. And you have Sol LeWitt that you can look at. Nick Cave is going to be at the airport. Lori Anderson has been to Lawrence more than once. She was a friend of Burroughs.
She was raised here.
Lori Anderson was? That might be right. That's probably right if you say so. And so there are a lot of artists that you saw in the film that have connection here. The upside down tree is a reference to Joseph Beuys, who is really an important conceptual artist. I suggest you look him up, but that's the upside down tree that they're talking about.
Right.
So, thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Thank
This has
you.
been
Would it,
wonderful.
Really wonderful.
would it be okay if I plug one experiential thing that folks can do related to the art museum out at the field station?
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. We're currently working with artist Janine Antoni on an experiential labyrinth in the shape of an ear, and it's called Hearing. It's located just north of town, sort of by the airport at the KU Field Station across, I think it's the McCall Reserve. And you can go anytime. It's open every day from sunup to sundown, and you'll see the path that you can walk. And I'm going to get this wrong, Saralyn, but the goal is to kind of return to the native grasses in the area. So please do that if you have a chance and want to get out and have an experiential art moment.
Sounds
did
like a
that.
field trip.
Yeah.
I did that earlier this, I guess it was late summer or early fall when she was here. Yeah, I did that. It was interesting. I was going to mention it, but everyone else was pitching in on things.
Yeah.
so-
It's been great. Thank you, Saralyn and Kelly. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Lots of great conversation.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that is it. We're a few minutes past 8, but I think we had a wonderful discussion of this movie. I guess, what we like to do is rate it 1 to 5, 5 being great, 1 being not so great. You can hold up your fingers and cast your vote. Ooh, look at
Say a-
that.
Say a 4.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah,
I can't
that's
get my
good.
fingers up.
A lot of 4s. some
Awesome.
5s.
I think we averaged 4-ish. I don't know. Had a couple 3s, couple 5s. So, all right.
And thanks to the Lawrence Public Library that does so much every day, all day
Here,
long, all the
here.
time. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well,
Vicki,
everybody
I
have a
love
great
your
night.
hair.
Have a good night, everyone.